Welcome to this lesson on the past continuous tense, which is also known as the past progressive tense. The past continuous is used quite frequently in English, so let's take a close look at when and how to use it. Are you ready? Let's dive in. When we talk about the past in English, there are two main tenses: the past simple and the past continuous. For example, the past simple would be I worked, while the past continuous would be I was working. So what's the difference? The past simple refers to an action that happened at a specific moment in the past. On the other hand, the past continuous describes an action that was ongoing over a period of time in the past. Here, we're focusing on a single action versus an action that continued over a period of time, and we want to emphasize the duration, okay? Let's look at an example using a timeline. Imagine this is our timeline. This is now. It's 10 p.m. 10 o'clock in the evening. Now let's go back to the past. Before this moment, you were working. Suppose you started work at 6 p.m. You would say, I started work at 6 p.m. Started, past simple. Then you finished work at 9 p.m. Again, past simple. I finished work at 9 p.m. Why did we use the simple past here? Because these are specific points in time. 6 p.m. is a point, 9 p.m. is a point. I started, I finished. That's past simple. But if you want to talk about the period from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. and emphasize that it continued for some time, you would say, I was working from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. This I was working is past continuous. Alright? That's the basic idea. Now let's see how we form it. To form the past continuous tense, we use the subject plus the past tense of the verb to be as a helping verb, followed by the main verb with ing. There are two forms of be in the past, was and were. For example, I was working. He was working. She was working. It was working. Then it changes a little for other subjects. You were working. We were working. And they were working. Alright? That gives you the basic idea of the past continuous tense. Now let's look at when we use it. We use the past continuous to talk about an action that was ongoing during a period of time. For example, Emma was studying all day. What's the period of time in this sentence? All day. And where is our past continuous? Was studying. Okay? We can also use this tense to describe an action that was happening at a particular moment in the past. For example, at 10 p.m., I was cooking. What's the moment in the past? 10 p.m. And where's the past continuous? Was cooking. Alright? So when would you say something like that? Let's imagine someone says, Oh, I tried to call you last night, but you didn't answer. You ask, What time? And they say, Oh, around 11 p.m. You could reply, "Oh, at 11 p.m. I was sleeping." That's one way we use the past continuous. One important use of the past continuous is to describe a long action that was ongoing over a period of time but was interrupted by another shorter action. In this case, the ongoing action is in the past continuous, while the action that interrupts it is in the past simple. For example, they were having dinner when we arrived. They were having dinner is past continuous, the action in progress. When we arrived is past simple, the shorter action that interrupts it. To link these two actions, we often use linkers like when, while, and as. When is usually used with a short action in the past simple. It emphasizes the moment when something happened. For example, I was reading a book when the phone rang. While and as are used to describe two actions happening at the same time, both of which can be continuous. They emphasize parallel actions rather than interruption. Look at this example with while. I was cooking while he was setting the table. An example with as. She was singing as he was playing the guitar. So, when you want to show that one action was in progress while another happened, you use the past continuous. Another important use of the past continuous is to give background information in a story. When we tell a story, we often want to describe what was happening around the main events, what the scene looked like, what people were doing, or what the situation was at that moment. These background actions are usually longer, ongoing activities, so we use the past continuous. The main events of a story, what happened, are usually in the past simple, but the background details that set the scene are in the past continuous. For example, the sun was setting, the birds were singing, and people were walking along the beach when I found the missing key. Here, was sitting, were singing, and were walking describe the background, what was happening in that moment. I found is the main event, the important action. Using the past continuous in this way helps create atmosphere and makes the story more vivid and engaging. These are the four main ways we use this tense, but there are also a few more advanced uses to know. Let me explain what these advanced uses are. One way we can use the past continuous is to talk about an action that was planned but not completed at a time in the past. For example, I was planning to visit Jonathan. At that moment in the past, you were thinking about it, you were planning it, but you didn't have time. So we say, I was planning to visit Jonathan, but I didn't have time. Notice that I didn't have time is past simple because it refers to a specific point in the past, while the planning or thinking was ongoing, which is why we use past continuous. Another way we use this tense is for a polite request. English often uses the expression, I was wondering if you could help me. Here, I was wondering is in the past continuous. but it's just a polite way of saying, could you help me? It's like saying, I was thinking about this and hoping you could help. Another example, I was hoping that you could join us for dinner. Similar to I was wondering, this expresses a polite request or desire. The past continuous gives it a gentle, indirect tone. Alright, so those are some of the main ways we use the past continuous tense. Now let's see when not to use the past continuous tense. In English, we have two main types of verbs: action verbs and stative verbs. Action verbs are sometimes referred to as dynamic verbs. These are verbs like work, walk, run, write, and clean. Stative verbs, on the other hand, describe a state or condition. This could be a mental state, an emotional state, or something else. Some stative verbs include know, own, hate, want, need, and many others. Here's the key point. With many stative verbs, we cannot use continuous tenses. For example, it's wrong to say, I was knowing him for many years, because know is a stative verb, and stative verbs don't work in the continuous form. Instead, we can say, I knew him for many years. It's also wrong to say, Sarah was hating snakes, because hate is an emotional stative verb, and stative verbs don't work in the continuous form, as I said before. Instead, we can say, Sarah hated snakes. It's also wrong to use a verb that shows ownership or possession or something you have, such as the verbs own, have, and possess. For instance, it's incorrect to say they were owning a Lamborghini. We just can't say that. Instead, we can say they owned a Lamborghini. There are also two very common verbs that we cannot use in the continuous form. For example, we were wanting to visit him. No, that's wrong. The correct version of this sentence is we wanted to visit him. Wanted, simple past. Or she was needing to catch the bus. Also incorrect. These simply don't work in the continuous tense. We can simply say she needed to catch the bus. There's also one very interesting and common verb that you should know about, and that's the verb to have. Now, have can sometimes be stative, and sometimes it can be dynamic or action-based. When it's stative, we cannot use it in the past continuous or any continuous tense. But when it has an action meaning, we can use it in this tense. For example, it's wrong to say he was having a car. No, we have to say he had a car. Had, past simple. But you can say things like he was having a party, he was having a good time, he was having dinner, he was having fun. All of these are correct, so you need to pay attention to how have is being used. There are some other verbs in English that can be dynamic in some cases and stative in others. Such verbs include taste, feel, see, and look. Let's look at them closely. The verb taste. When taste describes a permanent state, quality, or sensation, it functions as a stative verb. In this case, you normally cannot use it in continuous tenses. Look at this example. That soup tasted amazing. This describes a quality or state, not an action that progresses over time. On the other hand, saying that soup was tasting amazing is incorrect. Here, taste is stative, so the continuous form is not appropriate. When taste describes the action of sampling or testing something, it becomes a dynamic verb. And continuous forms are correct. For example, it's correct to say, I was tasting the soup to see if it needed salt. Here, tasting is an ongoing action. You're actively trying the soup. The verb feel. When feel describes emotions, sensations, or opinions, it's stative. For example, I felt happy yesterday. That fabric felt soft. On the other hand, it's incorrect to say I was feeling happy yesterday, although this verb is sometimes used in continuous forms in casual speech for emphasis, but grammatically it's stative. When feel describes touching or testing something, it's dynamic. For example, I was feeling the fabric to see if it was smooth. The verb see is similar to the verbs we've just discussed. It can be an action verb in some cases and stative in others. When it's an action verb, it means to meet someone. For example, I was seeing a doctor. However, when it's stative, it means to understand or perceive. For example, I see the problem. This sentence means I understand the problem. The same goes for the verb look. When it's an action verb, it means to actively observe. For example, I was looking at the stars. But when it's stative, it refers to appearance, which is a state. For example, you looked tired yesterday. This sentence means that your appearance showed you felt tired. Now let's move on and look at the structure of the past continuous. We'll cover positive sentences, negative sentences, and questions. For a positive sentence, the basic structure of the past continuous tense is subject plus the past tense of the verb to be, which is was or were, plus the main verb plus ing. Let's see how that works. For example, with I, he, she, or it, we say was working. Repeat after me. I was working yesterday. He was working. She was working. It was working. Now, for you, we, and they, we change the form of to be. You were working. We were working. They were working. For a negative sentence, it's very simple. We just add not. There's a way to shorten this, which we will see soon. But for now, just focus on adding not. For example, I was not working. He was not working. She was not working. It was not working. And for other subjects, you were not working. We were not working. They were not working. To form a question, we just change the word order. Instead of saying I was, we say was I. Instead of he was, we say was he. For example, was I working yesterday? Was he working? Was she working? Was it working when you used it? Were you working? Were we working? Were they working? That's the basic question structure. And remember, if you want to add a question word like who, what, where, when, why, or how, just put it at the beginning. Where was he working? Where was he working? And remember, do not capitalize was or were in the middle of the sentence. That's basically the structure of the past continuous tense. Now let's look at some contractions. Contractions are when we shorten 2 or 3 words into one. We'll go over how to do that in just a moment. One important thing to remember is that in the past continuous tense, positive sentences cannot use contractions, but negative sentences definitely can. Let's see how these negative contractions work. If you want to say, I was not, in a shorter way, it becomes wasn't. So we would say, I wasn't. Okay, how did that happen? We basically took the 2 words, removed the O from not, added an apostrophe in its place, and joined the words together. That's how was not became wasn't. For were not, we do the same thing. Remove the O, add an apostrophe, and it becomes weren't. Repeat after me. I wasn't sleeping. He wasn't sleeping. She wasn't sleeping. It wasn't sleeping. Now for the other form with were. You weren't sleeping. We weren't sleeping. They weren't sleeping. And that's basically it for making the contractions. Next, let's look at some spelling changes we need for the main verb when using this tense. For most verbs, all you do is add ing. For example, talk becomes talking. Sell becomes selling. However, some verbs need a small change. We're always going to be adding ing for all the verbs, but sometimes you have to make some changes before that. For example, verbs that end with e need a small change. We drop the e and then add ing. So, make becomes making and take becomes taking. Next, verbs ending in ie are a little different. We drop the ie, add a y, and then add ing. For example, tie becomes tying, and lie becomes lying. See, we replaced the ie with a y and added ing. Now there's another pattern called CVC, which stands for consonant vowel consonant. A vowel in English is A, E, I, O, or U, and a consonant is any other letter. For verbs that follow this pattern at the end, we double the last consonant before adding ing. To figure this out, look at the word from the end, because not every word is just 3 letters long. But always check the verb from the end, okay? CVC. If it follows this pattern, then double the last letter before adding ing. For example, jog becomes jogging. Sit becomes sitting. Alright? Finally, when you form the ing form of a verb that ends in C, you need to add a K before the ing. This is because in English, a word cannot end with a C followed directly by ing. Steps to follow. Look at the base verb ending in C, add a K after the C, then add ing. For example, panic becomes panicking. Mimic becomes mimicking. These are some of the main spelling changes you need to remember when forming verbs in this tense. Now, in English, when someone asks you a question, we usually don't just reply with yes or no, because that can sound a little blunt. We can be a bit more polite, and I'll show you how. Also, you don't need a long answer if all the information you're giving is basically yes or no. I'll show you a simple, polite way to do it. For example, in this tense, if someone asks, "Was he playing the piano?" you could answer, "Yes, he was," for a positive reply, or "No, he wasn't," for a negative one. In a positive reply, there's no contraction because there isn't one. In a negative reply, you can definitely use the contraction, especially in informal conversations where this kind of short answer is common. Take another example. Were they studying for the test? Again, just take your answer from the question. Yes, they were, or no, they weren't. Now there's one exception, questions about you. For example, if someone asks, "Were you managing a team?" let's say during a job interview, you cannot just say were. Your correct response would be, "Yes, I was," or "No, I wasn't." So that's the past continuous tense in a nutshell. Remember, we use it for actions that were ongoing in the past, for actions happening at a specific moment, or for actions that were interrupted by another event. We form it with was, were, plus verb plus ing. And don't forget the spelling rules and contractions for negatives. Practice makes perfect, so try making sentences about your own past activities. Keep using was, were plus ing, and soon it will feel natural. Thanks for watching and keep practicing your English.